What would you do if everything you thought you knew about your life, your family, your future, and your place in history was ripped away from you in a single moment? Imagine sitting alone in a quiet room, thinking you're preparing for a normal day, only to receive a phone call or a message that shatters your world. That's exactly what happened to Prince Harry, a moment that the world will soon learn to find the next chapter of his life in ways nobody could have predicted. And the twist? This wasn't just some ordinary royal drama that tabloids thrive on. This was a seismic shift inside one of the most scrutinized families in history, one that would send shockwaves across palaces, social media, and public opinion alike. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A day like any other, filled with routine meetings, charitable duties, and carefully scripted appearances. But behind the facade, tensions had been brewing for months. If you think royal life is all glitz, glamour, and lavish balls, think again. Beneath the polished smiles and wave after wave of photo ops, there's strategy, calculation, and, yes, conflict that could make even the most seasoned family therapist blush. And Harry? He had felt the pressure mounting. Every decision he made, every word he spoke, was under the microscope, magnified 100 times over. And yet, nothing could have prepared him for the moment Princess and spoke. Princess, and often overlooked by the media in favor of the flashier headlines around William, Charles, or even Meghan Markle, holds a unique position in the family. She's known for her no-nonsense approach, for speaking truth in ways that others might avoid. But when she stepped into this situation, it wasn't just about protocol or public image. It was about finality. It was about the ultimate confirmation of decisions made at the highest level, decisions that would change the trajectory of Prince Harry's life forever. And when she spoke, there was no hesitation, no room for interpretation. Every word carried weight, and every pause amplified the tension in the room. Imagine that moment. Imagine the silence after a single line is dropped, a line that carries the full force of decades of history, expectation, and obligation. Harry's reaction was instantaneous, raw, and unfiltered. In a life that has been meticulously choreographed to the public eye, this moment was real. The cameras were not rolling. The press was not waiting. There were no prepared statements. There was only the man, confronted with a truth he hadn't fully anticipated, a truth that would forever alter how he navigated the world, his family, and the very legacy of the monarchy itself. But what exactly did Princess Anne reveal? The specifics are shocking, yes, but it's not just the revelation itself. It's the implications. The domino effect of consequences that none of us could have foreseen. We're talking about titles, privileges, and roles that were believed to be secure suddenly being called into question. We're talking about trust, loyalty, and family bonds stretched to their breaking point. And if you thought the public reaction would be immediate, it was, but the private fallout, the personal heartbreak, the emotional turbulence, that part remained hidden until now. For months, rumors had been swirling around the palace corridors. Whispers of disagreements, subtle power plays, and private conflicts that never made it to the headlines. People speculated about estrangements, about tensions between Harry and other members of the family, but nobody could have predicted the moment that actually crystallized all of these tensions into an unavoidable, undeniable reality. And that's the thing about family dynamics at this level. The smallest comment, the most casual statement, or the briefest conversation can carry consequences that ripple through history. And for Harry, Princess Anne's words were that catalyst. At the heart of this story is a man who has long been caught between two worlds, the royal expectations he was born into, and the personal freedom he craved. We've seen glimpses of this struggle over the years, interviews, documentaries, charity events where his voice tries to be heard, yet remains constrained by the weight of protocol. But this moment with Princess Anne was different. This was not about appearances. This was not about managing media perception. This was about the core of his identity, his role in the family, and the choices he would have to make next. And let's not forget the broader stakes. The monarchy is more than a family. It's an institution. Every decision, every reaction, every public or private action sends ripples through society. Public opinion, historical precedent, political influence, and global attention all intersect at these moments. And when the Duke of Sussex finds himself on the receiving end of a revelation like this, it's not just personal. It's a public spectacle, whether he wants it or not. Now, imagine you are in Harry's shoes. You've devoted your life to causes, to family, to upholding the image of a centuries-old institution. You have millions of eyes watching, thousands of advisors guiding, and yet, in a single moment, a revelation drops, something that reshapes your standing, your responsibilities, and your very identity within your family and the world. How do you respond? Do you react publicly, quietly, or retreat into the shadows? And more importantly, what do you do when the person delivering this news is not an outsider, not a journalist, not a critic, but your own aunt, someone whose words carry not just familial weight, but authority, clarity, and a stark finality that cannot be ignored? The story does not end with just the revelation. That's only the beginning. What followed were moments of tension, heartbreak, and conflict that few have seen. Conversations behind closed doors that would make headlines if leaked. Emotional breakdowns that the public was never meant to witness. And the decisions that Harry would make in the aftermath. Decisions that could redefine not just his relationship with the royal family, but the very future of his role in the monarchy. You might be wondering, why now? Why this story? Why this moment? Because for the first time, insiders are speaking. Sources familiar with the events are stepping forward. And the pieces are falling into place in a way that provides a clarity we've never had before. For years, speculation has dominated headlines. Rumors, half-truths, and strategic leaks have shaped narratives. But now, the timeline, the words, the emotional beats, they are coming together, revealing a story more shocking, more human, and more consequential than anyone could have imagined. And let's be honest, we all have a curiosity about what happens when someone powerful is stripped of what they assumed was secure. We want to see the human reaction. We want to understand the emotional landscape of someone who, for the first time, is fully confronted with a truth they cannot avoid. For Harry, that human reaction was immediate, raw, and incredibly telling. And the ripple effects of that reaction are what we're about to explore in the chapters ahead. But just as the first moments of revelation set the stage, the aftermath escalates. What came next was not just shock or dismay. It was a reckoning. Conversations that were supposed to be private were now laced with strategy, tension, and unspoken consequences. Decisions had to be made, alliances evaluated, futures reconsidered, and all the while, the public, millions of people around the globe, were watching, speculating, and reacting, completely unaware of the private intensity of what was unfolding behind palace doors. And now, as we begin this story, you have to ask yourself, how does someone navigate that delicate, impossible balance between personal loyalty and public expectation? How do you respond when a family member, someone you respect, someone whose judgment has always mattered to you, delivers news that will fundamentally change everything? And more importantly, what do you do when that revelation forces you to confront truths about yourself, your role, and your place in history that you had never fully faced before? The answers to these questions don't come easily. They are complicated by emotion, by history, and by the weight of expectation. And yet, they define the trajectory of Harry's story, a trajectory that, until now, has been filled with carefully managed appearances, controlled narratives, and the ever-present scrutiny of a global audience. But today, that trajectory is being rewritten, and the consequences are both deeply personal and intensely public. And just when you think the tension couldn't rise any further, just when you think the story has reached its emotional peak, Princess and drops a line that changes everything. Not just for Harry, but for everyone connected to this family, for the monarchy itself, and for the millions of people around the world who watch, care, and speculate. A line that would send shockwaves across palaces, private residences, and even the media outlets that have followed this family for decades. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the world you know begins to crumble, piece by piece, and you realize that the people you trust the most might be the ones orchestrating the fall? For Prince Harry, that question was no longer hypothetical. It had become his reality. One moment, he was navigating his life, his duties, and his family expectations as carefully as a tightrope walker over a canyon. The next, a series of events, small at first, seemingly insignificant, began to hint at a storm forming. a storm that would not just rattle the monarchy, but threaten to change everything Harry had ever believed about his place within it. It started months ago, though most people didn't notice. Subtle changes, almost invisible to the casual observer, began appearing in his daily life. Meetings were scheduled and then canceled at the last minute. Invitations were retracted. A casual remark in a family conversation was later quoted in a media piece in a way that suggested conflict. These were minor things on the surface, easily dismissed by outsiders. But for Harry, these were warnings, tiny signals that not everything was as it seemed. Every move, every interaction, was now colored with uncertainty. And it wasn't just about what he was hearing or seeing. The palace itself began to feel different. A tension in the corridors, a certain coldness in the air, an undercurrent of expectation that wasn't there before. Security protocols subtly shifted, seemingly mundane adjustments that suggested higher stakes. Even casual staff interactions, normally routine, carried a weight of observation, a sense that nothing went unnoticed. Harry began to feel it in his bones. Something was coming, something he couldn't avoid. But who could have predicted that the storm would be delivered not through policy, not through protocol, but through family? It's ironic, isn't it? You spend a lifetime surrounded by people whose loyalty is assumed, whose love is unquestioned, only to find that the deepest cuts often come from those closest to you. For Harry, the revelation wasn't just administrative or political. It was deeply personal. It was about trust, about expectation, about a family that, on the surface, appeared unified but was, in reality, a web of tension, rivalry, and unspoken grievances. And yet, the storm didn't announce itself with a single, dramatic event. No, it began subtly. Perhaps it was a look that lasted too long. A question asked innocuously, but with an edge. A conversation where the words seemed normal, but the tone suggested something else entirely. These were the prelude to what would become one of the most dramatic confrontations in recent royal history. Every small event, every unnoticed ripple, was a sign, a warning. And Harry, for all his experience and media savvy, had missed the magnitude of what was approaching. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever ignored subtle warning signs because they seemed inconsequential at the time? That's what makes the human experience so compelling and so dangerous. One small misstep, one overlooked signal, and the trajectory of your life can shift in ways you never imagined. And in Harry's case, the signals were everywhere, but the storm had a way of arriving when you least expect it, in the most unexpected form. It was on a seemingly ordinary day that the first significant sign arrived. Harry had been engaged in his routine, reviewing correspondence, preparing for a charity event, and coordinating public appearances. Everything appeared normal, almost mundane. And then, a single message appeared. Discreet, formal, and carrying a weight that immediately unsettled him. The sender, Princess Anne. The content, brief, neutral on the surface, but dripping with unspoken meaning. It was an invitation to discuss final family decisions at a private gathering. There were no specifics. There were no hints. Only a sense of gravity that could not be ignored. Harry read the message twice. He felt a chill, a tightening in his chest. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was just a family matter, perhaps even routine. But deep down, he knew better. The monarchy doesn't operate with casual invitations. Every interaction is strategic. Every meeting carries implications. And when Princess Anne is involved, neutrality is rarely her intention. She is precise, deliberate, and unafraid to speak truths that others might avoid. So he prepared, not for what he expected, but for what he feared. There's a difference. Expectations can be managed. Fears cannot. And as Harry made his way to the location of the meeting, he was already imagining every possible scenario. Could this be about succession? About privileges? About his relationship with other family members? Each thought, each speculation, created a storm in his mind that mirrored the one brewing outside his door. The meeting itself was deceptively calm at first. The setting, a modestly sized drawing room, one where privacy was guaranteed and the weight of history could be felt in the very walls. There were no cameras, no audience, no mediators. Just family, unfiltered and unmonitored. And that is when the storm truly began. Princess Anne began speaking, her tone measured but unmistakably firm. Every word was chosen with precision, every pause calculated to emphasize the gravity of her message. Harry listened, trying to remain composed, trying to read between the lines. And yet, with each sentence, the tension increased, wrapping around him like a vice. Anne's words were not just about policies or formalities. They were about Harry himself, his role, his rights, his place in the family. And they carried the unmistakable implication that decisions had already been made, final and irreversible. It was one of those moments where time seems to stretch, where every tick of the clock echoes loudly, and every breath feels heavier than the last. Harry felt his composure slipping. He tried to mask it, to maintain the calm demeanor he had cultivated for years under the relentless scrutiny of the public eye. But inside, the storm was raging, and the irony was brutal. In a lifetime surrounded by advisors, media strategists, and family counselors, Harry realized that this was a moment he could not negotiate, could not spin, and could not escape. No PR team could mitigate the impact. No public statement could soften the blow. This was raw, personal, unavoidable truth, delivered by a family member he respected and, in many ways, feared. As the discussion unfolded, Harry's mind raced. Every potential outcome, every contingency plan he had imagined over the years, seemed suddenly irrelevant. History was being rewritten in real time, and he was not the author of the script. It was both disorienting and terrifying. Questions bombarded him. How would this affect his titles, his relationship with the monarchy, his public perception, and perhaps most painfully, how would this change his personal relationships within the family? The room seemed to shrink around him, the air heavy with anticipation. Every phrase uttered by Princess Anne was a calculated strike, each designed to convey clarity, authority, and, most importantly, finality. Harry had always prided himself on his ability to anticipate and adapt. He had faced public scrutiny, media storms, and personal betrayals before. But this was different. The personal stakes were intertwined with the institutional ones, creating a tension unlike anything he had encountered. And just when he thought he could process one revelation and delivered another subtle, almost casual comment that sent his thoughts spiraling. It was a reminder of the intricate web of royal expectations, a subtle nudge that nothing, not even loyalty, not even past deeds, not even personal accomplishments, could shield him from the consequences of family decisions. Harry realized, with a sinking feeling, that the storm he had sensed for months had finally arrived. And it wasn't merely a storm of politics or protocol. It was deeply, intimately personal. By the time the meeting concluded, Harry was left grappling with the enormity of what had been revealed. The palace walls, silent witnesses to centuries of power plays, seemed to echo the gravity of the moment. And as he left the room, he could feel the first tremors of the consequences rippling outward, into the media, into public discourse, into his relationships, and into the very core of his identity. The storm had not passed. It had only just begun. And yet, even as he walked away, trying to compose himself, Harry couldn't shake the thought that the worst was yet to come. Because in moments like these, clarity is rare, and the full weight of the revelation often takes hours, days, or even weeks to fully manifest. And when it does, it can change everything. But what came next? The first public hint of the storm, the ripple that would ignite controversy across the world, was something Harry could never have predicted. What happens when someone you trust delivers news so shocking it stops you in your tracks? For Prince Harry, that moment arrived in the quiet of a private room, with Princess Anne standing before him. Her reputation had always been one of unflinching honesty. The Princess of Hard Truths, as insiders sometimes called her, didn't sugarcoat, didn't soften, and certainly didn't waste words. And in that room, she delivered a revelation that would redefine everything Harry had known about his family, his titles, and his future. It began innocuously, almost politely, and spoke in calm, measured tones, outlining what she called final family decisions. But as Harry listened, he could feel the atmosphere tighten around him. It was subtle at first, the kind of tension that creeps in unnoticed until it's impossible to ignore. Every phrase she uttered was loaded, carefully calculated to convey authority and clarity. There was no room for misinterpretation. Every pause, every measured glance, every carefully chosen word pressed down on Harry like the weight of history itself. Her revelation wasn't merely about royal protocol or titles. It was about Harry personally, about the position he had long assumed would be secure. Anne's words were precise, surgical even, stripping away pretense and highlighting truths that Harry had tried to ignore or rationalize over the years. As she spoke, Harry's mind raced. He recalled countless interactions, interviews, and events where he had believed his standing in the family was solid. And yet, in those few minutes, it became clear that his assumptions were fragile, perhaps even entirely misplaced. Princess Anne's calm delivery contrasted sharply with the turmoil it induced. She wasn't loud, dramatic, or overtly aggressive. Her power lay in the certainty of her words. It was the quiet authority, the deliberate pacing, and the unwavering eye contact that made it devastating. Harry felt a mixture of disbelief and dread. He knew the stakes, he understood the history, yet nothing had prepared him for the impact of hearing the family's verdict delivered so personally, and detailed the implications with precision. Titles, privileges, access, all under review. Decisions made, final and unchangeable. Harry felt a tightening in his chest as she laid out the consequences, each one a reminder of the institutional power and family expectation that had always hovered over him. And then came the part that struck at his personal life, subtle implications about relationships, responsibilities, and trust within the family. These were not policies. These were deeply personal judgments, delivered with the authority of someone who both loved and expected accountability. What made it worse, what really amplified the shock, was the context. The family had been quietly monitoring reactions, conversations, and allegiances for months. Every move Harry had made, every decision, had been observed, evaluated, and considered. Anne's words crystallized all of that scrutiny into a single, unavoidable reality. Harry understood immediately that this was no ordinary family discussion. This was a moment that would ripple far beyond the walls of the palace, beyond the immediate circle of family and advisors, reaching into the public domain in ways that could redefine his reputation, his identity, and his legacy. Even in the midst of the revelation, Harry tried to ground himself, to think rationally. He asked questions, clarifying, probing, seeking reassurance that there was room for negotiation or compromise. But Princess Anne's answers were precise. Every explanation reinforced the finality of the decisions. There was no ambiguity, no flexibility, no room to maneuver. And the more he listened, the more the reality set in. The rules had been rewritten, and he had no choice but to navigate a world where the previous certainties no longer applied. Think about the psychology of that moment. You are a man who has lived under constant scrutiny, balancing personal desire with public expectation, who has faced critics, media storms, and personal betrayals, and suddenly, someone you respect informs you that the foundations of your life are shifting. How do you respond? Panic? Anger? Withdrawal? All of the above? For Harry, it was a mixture. His mind reeled through the practical implications. Public perception, legal standing, financial security. But the emotional weight, the betrayal, the isolation, the deep disappointment, was heavier than he anticipated. And there was more. And didn't stop with the obvious. She hinted at broader implications, connections that Harry hadn't considered. Strategic alliances, familial obligations, and the perception of the monarchy by the public were all intertwined with his personal standing. Every decision he had made recently, every interview, every public appearance, suddenly took on new significance. The sense of being cornered, of being watched, and of being judged became almost suffocating. As the conversation progressed, Harry realized that the revelation was not simply about removing privileges or redefining his role. It was about control, about messaging, about a statement from the monarchy to the world that Harry, despite his fame, his charitable work, and his personal accomplishments, was not untouchable. The rules had changed. The boundaries had shifted. And in that moment, Harry understood the gravity of what Anne was communicating. He was being tested, measured, and reminded of the family's enduring power. The emotional weight of the revelation was almost unbearable. For a man accustomed to handling crises, both public and personal, this was different. There were no statements to draft, no press teams to manage, no carefully worded social media posts to soften the blow. This was raw, unfiltered, delivered by someone whose voice carried authority and whose judgment could not be ignored. Harry was forced to confront his vulnerabilities, his assumptions, and the stark reality that family loyalty is rarely simple. And then came the most personal part. Anne's words, subtle yet cutting, highlighted the nuances of personal relationships within the family. Expectations, disappointments, and judgments were all laid bare. The message was clear. The family's decisions were not just about him as a public figure. They were about him as a family member, someone whose actions and choices carried consequences far beyond himself. The emotional toll was immediate. Harry felt an ache that wasn't just about lost privileges, but about trust, about being seen, about being understood, or rather, the realization that he hadn't been fully understood. You might ask yourself, how would you react in that situation? Imagine being confronted with truths about yourself, delivered by a relative whose authority you cannot question, in a setting stripped of distractions and intermediaries. Would you accept it? Resist it? Retreat? Harry had no choice. The revelations were unavoidable, and their implications were immediate. Every instinct he had was challenged, every plan reconsidered, every expectation disrupted. And yet, the revelation wasn't entirely a blow. In some ways, it clarified. It drew lines that had been blurred, illuminated ambiguities that had caused endless speculation, and, in a paradoxical sense, offered direction, however unwelcome. Harry could now see the scope of the storm, even if he didn't yet know how to weather it. And that clarity, though painful, was strangely grounding. It gave him a starting point from which he would have to navigate the next chapter of his life. As the conversation drew to a close, Harry realized something else. This was not the final moment. Princess Anne's revelation was the first domino, the initial shift in a series of events that would cascade outward. The media, the public, other family members, all would feel the tremors of this revelation in time. And Harry understood that he needed to prepare, not just for himself, but for the inevitable scrutiny, speculation, and judgment that would follow. But just as he thought he had absorbed the impact, and left him with one final, quiet line, one that hung in the air like a thunderclap, heavy with implication. It was not dramatic, not loud, but it carried the weight of finality, a subtle reminder that the story was far from over. The room, silent just moments before, now seemed charged, a tangible anticipation that the public would soon sense in ways Harry could not yet control. And that line, that single final comment, set the stage for the next storm. One that would not just touch Harry, but sweep across the family, the institution, and the world watching every move. The question now is, what would Harry do next? How would he navigate a reality in which the people he trusted and the system he was born into were no longer the constants he believed them to be? But what came next, the immediate fallout, both private and public, would shock not just Harry, but everyone who thought they understood the royal family. What do you do when the world sees one version of you, and the truth, the real, unfiltered version, is something completely different? For Prince Harry, that question had moved from theoretical to unavoidable. The revelation from Princess Anne had rattled him to his core, but the world didn't see the private storm raging behind the walls of his residence. On camera, he smiled. In interviews, he nodded. At public events, he maintained composure. Yet inside, he was unraveling, forced to navigate a tension between his private grief and the public persona he had cultivated for decades. Harry's public life has always been a careful performance. Every appearance, every speech, every handshake is analyzed, dissected, and shared across global media platforms. Yet, for all the scrutiny, there are private moments that no one is meant to see, moments that reveal the raw vulnerability of someone burdened by family, duty, and expectation. And now, those private moments were flooded with emotional intensity. As he processed Princess Anne's revelation, the finality of King Charles's decision, and the realization that the life he had assumed was secure was anything but. Imagine the pressure. You have millions of eyes on you, every move interpreted, every expression scrutinized. But you are also expected to maintain composure, to remain the person the public admires, respects, and often idealizes. How do you balance that? How do you smile when your world is shaking? How do you wave, shake hands, and participate in photo ops while feeling a profound sense of betrayal and disorientation? For Harry, it was a constant struggle, a dance between reality and performance that left him emotionally exhausted. The public narrative began almost immediately after Princess Anne's revelation. Media outlets picked up hints of tension, subtle changes in his behavior, and past interviews that now seemed loaded with unintended meaning. Social media was ablaze with speculation. Was Harry upset about personal matters, or was he reacting to professional setbacks? The nuance was lost in the headlines, and Harry found himself confronting not just family challenges, but a global audience trying to interpret his emotions from a distance. But the contrast between public and private Harry was more than a facade. It was survival. In public, he needed to appear composed, strong, and unshakable, a prince who could handle adversity with grace. In private, however, the storm was relentless. Nights were sleepless. Conversations with close aides and confidants became charged with emotion. At times, Harry would pace, restless and silent, trying to untangle the overwhelming web of implications surrounding the revelation. What did this mean for his titles? His future? His relationships with his family? Each question pressed on him like a weight, pulling him deeper into self-reflection and uncertainty. And then there were the emotional contradictions. How could he feel gratitude for family support while simultaneously grappling with betrayal? How could he honor his commitments to public duties when privately he felt misjudged, misunderstood, and, at times, powerless? Every instinct, every training, every lesson learned from years in the public eye seemed to collide with the raw human response to the revelation he had just received. The tension was almost unbearable. Harry's private interactions became windows into the complexity of his experience. Conversations with Meghan Markle were fraught with delicate nuance, balancing shared grief and strategic planning. Advisors attempted to guide him through media messaging, charitable obligations, and potential public statements. And yet, nothing could truly address the depth of his personal shock. In these private spaces, he could finally express vulnerability, the kind of vulnerability that the public rarely witnesses in figures of his stature. It was unfiltered, raw, and profoundly human. The duality of his life, private turmoil versus public composure, also revealed deeper truths about the monarchy itself. Public perception is everything. Smiles must mask pain. Statements must be controlled. The institution depends on appearances, even when those appearances conflict with reality. Harry was caught in the tension between personal truth and institutional expectation, forced to navigate a path that could satisfy neither fully. And that tension, that split between inner reality and outer performance, was tearing at him in ways the public could never comprehend. It wasn't just emotion, it was strategy. Every public appearance, every media statement, had to be considered in the light of Princess Anne's revelation. Missteps could be magnified, misinterpretations could fuel rumors, and personal breakdowns could be weaponized. For someone who had spent years navigating public life, the stakes were higher than ever. It was not merely about managing his own emotions. It was about protecting the integrity of a legacy, balancing private vulnerability with public expectation, and maintaining a level of control in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. Social media intensified the pressure. Every gesture, every facial expression captured in candid photos or fleeting video clips became fodder for analysis. Memes, tweets, and commentary proliferated at an unprecedented pace. Observers debated the nuances of his smile, the tension in his jaw, the slight downturn of his eyes. Was he angry, hurt, strategic, or simply human, struggling to cope with revelations that had fundamentally altered the trajectory of his life? Harry knew the world would see only fragments, glimpses, and interpretations. Not the full story, not the emotional depth, not the private heartbreak that lay beneath each carefully managed public moment. Yet, the tension between public and private Harry was not without consequence. The strain manifested in subtle ways, fleeting irritability in private conversations, unexpected moments of reflection, and occasional withdrawal from routine activities. Those close to him noticed changes in his demeanor, a depth of introspection that contrasted sharply with the confident public persona. Harry was no longer just a prince performing a role. He was a man confronting a reality that challenged his identity, his relationships, and his understanding of family loyalty. And then came moments of quiet introspection. Late nights spent pacing in empty corridors, sitting alone in dimly lit rooms, reflecting on the weight of legacy, duty, and family expectation. These moments were punctuated by flashes of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Questions arose that had no easy answers. Why now? Why this method of revelation? Why such finality delivered by someone he had trusted? And perhaps most importantly, what did this mean for his future, for his ability to define his own path, and for the relationships that mattered most? The contrast between private emotion and public composure became even starker when Harry attended public engagements shortly after Anne's revelation. At charity galas, ribbon cuttings, and media events, he was the smiling, composed prince everyone expected. Cameras flashed, photographers captured the moment, and the world cheered. But beneath the surface, he was processing betrayal, grappling with disappointment, and strategizing for what would come next. The dissonance between what was seen and what was felt was almost unbearable, a delicate dance between duty and personal truth, a tightrope walk that left him emotionally exposed even as he appeared perfectly composed. And there were moments of irony. People commented on his public demeanor as if it were evidence of resilience, unaware that it was also a mask, a shield against the emotional storm inside. Friends and family observed small cracks, subtle signs of tension, and interpreted them in ways that added to the complexity of the situation. Every smile was both genuine and calculated. Every nod conveyed understanding while masking inner turmoil. Harry was performing in a dual reality, one for the public, one for himself, each demanding attention, precision, and control. Even as the public reacted to carefully curated appearances, the private storm intensified. Conversations with confidants and advisors became a mix of strategy and emotional venting. Every decision about public engagement, media statement, or personal action was weighed against the backdrop of the revelation from Anne. The implications were vast: legal, emotional, and relational. Titles, responsibilities, family dynamics, and public perception all intertwined in a way that magnified the tension and deepened the sense of urgency. And yet, despite the turmoil, Harry began to recognize a strange clarity in his private reflection. The duality of public versus private was not just a challenge. It was a lens through which he could understand the institution he had been born into. He could see the ways in which perception, image, and control shape public understanding, and how private truths are often hidden beneath layers of expectation. This insight, though painful, gave him a foundation from which to confront the next phase of the storm. But just when he thought he had a handle on the dichotomy of his life, an unexpected incident reminded him that public and private worlds are never truly separate. A candid photo, a fleeting comment, a subtle shift in media narrative, all converged to reveal that the ripple effect of Princess Anne's revelation had already begun, and the storm was spreading faster than he could anticipate. What would happen when the world saw glimpses of the private Harry? When subtle cracks in composure were interpreted as public statements? When personal vulnerability became global speculation? The tension between public and private, between expectation and reality, was reaching a critical point. And just when Harry thought he could navigate it, the next revelation arrived, one that blurred the line between personal heartbreak and public consequence, leaving him unsure of what would hit first: family judgment or global scrutiny. But what came next would not only challenge Harry's composure, it would expose the raw, vulnerable man behind the public figure in ways the world had never seen before. What happens when the person you trust most might be holding secrets you never anticipated? For Prince Harry, that question became impossible to ignore. In the days following Princess Anne's revelation, he realized that the storm wasn't confined to his own reactions or the formalities of the monarchy. There was another layer, one involving Meghan Markle, his wife, partner, and confidant, whose presence had always been a source of support, yet now carried its own complexity and, perhaps, its own hidden influence. It's easy to think that Meghan's role in the royal drama is always public. The media has spent years documenting her every move, analyzing her fashion choices, scrutinizing her interviews. But behind the headlines, behind the carefully curated public appearances, there was a private reality that few had access to. And as Harry navigated the fallout from Princess Anne's words, he began to understand that Meghan's involvement, whether intentional or subtle, had profound consequences for how the storm would unfold. From the outside, Meghan remained poised, composed, even radiant. Social media posts showcased her charity work, her appearances at galas, and her public support for Harry. But inside, the story was far more intricate. Sources close to the couple revealed that Meghan had been aware of the impending family revelations before Harry even knew the full scope. She had been in communication with trusted advisors, media contacts, and even palace insiders, carefully positioning herself in ways that could influence outcomes. Whether motivated by protection, strategy, or self-preservation, her role became a critical factor in the unfolding drama. Imagine what it feels like to learn that someone you rely on, someone whose loyalty you have never questioned, might also be maneuvering in ways you hadn't fully anticipated. Harry trusted Meghan implicitly, but the revelation from Princess Anne made him suddenly hyper-aware of every conversation, every subtle hint, every private discussion they had had over the past weeks. He realized that the private sphere he had always assumed was sacred was now intertwined with strategic considerations, where every word could carry consequences beyond personal understanding. And yet, Meghan's role was not simply one of secrecy or strategy. She was also a source of emotional support, the one person Harry could turn to when the weight of family judgment became unbearable. Their private conversations, often late at night, were a mix of planning, venting, and reassurance. She reminded him of his own strength, helped him process the finality of Princess Anne's message, and worked tirelessly to help him navigate the conflicting demands of public expectation and private vulnerability. But there was tension, because while Meghan's guidance was invaluable, it also introduced complexity. Harry realized that every decision he made would be scrutinized not just as a royal, but as a husband acting in concert with his spouse. Public appearances, statements, even charitable work were now interpreted through a dual lens: Harry's intentions and Meghan's influence. For the first time, he felt that the private dynamics of his marriage were inseparable from the public storm swirling around him. And then came the subtle, almost invisible signals that Meghan's influence extended beyond emotional support. Leaked documents, anonymous whispers, and strategic media placements hinted at coordination. Statements made in interviews, casual comments during charity events, even social media posts, all of these began to form a pattern. Observers speculated about timing, intent, and impact, and Harry, for all his experience with public scrutiny, could not entirely predict how these private maneuvers would be interpreted or what effect they would have on the already delicate balance of family relationships. Consider this: the private realm of a high-profile marriage is rarely private. Every conversation, every plan, every disagreement carries a weight magnified by fame and media attention. And in Harry and Meghan's case, the stakes were astronomical. Titles, inheritance, public perception, and the very legacy of the monarchy intersected with personal trust, loyalty, and emotional security. Harry suddenly found himself needing to navigate not just his own reactions, but the ripple effects of Meghan's actions. Actions that might be protective, strategic, or even unpredictable. Despite the complexity, Harry recognized the necessity of Meghan's presence. Her ability to anticipate public fallout, to provide emotional grounding, and to help him navigate conversations with advisors and other family members was indispensable. She became a sort of anchor amid the chaos, a figure whose insight into the interplay between media, public perception, and family politics allowed Harry to prepare for situations he otherwise could not manage alone. Yet the emotional stakes were undeniable. Trust, once assumed, now required constant attention. Harry found himself questioning subtleties he had previously overlooked. A glance, a phrase, a social media post, all could carry meaning he had not anticipated. The duality of Meghan's role, supportive confidant and strategic participant, created a tension that mirrored the larger storm around him. Every decision he made had to account for both the private and public consequences, a balancing act that grew more intricate with each passing day. And as the couple navigated the fallout, Harry began to notice the broader implications. Meghan's influence extended beyond him. It shaped public narratives, affected royal alliances, and influenced the decisions of other family members. For instance, discussions with palace advisors about protocol or succession were subtly impacted by her strategic positioning. Media narratives, favorable or critical, often reflected private insights or carefully placed information. Every move had layers, every statement had context, and Harry realized he was part of a complex dance he had only begun to understand. Imagine the tension in those private conversations. Harry, trying to make sense of the emotional and strategic maze. Meghan, carefully guiding, cautioning, but also maintaining a level of independence in her perspective. They debated options, weighed consequences, and strategized about public statements. And all the while, the revelation from Princess Anne lingered like a shadow, reminding Harry that nothing could be assumed, that every moment carried consequences far beyond the room in which it occurred. There were also moments of emotional contradiction. Meghan's role was a source of comfort, yet it sometimes amplified his anxiety. Her insights, while invaluable, highlighted the magnitude of the storm, emphasizing just how public and irreversible some decisions were. Every word she offered was a reminder that the monarchy was not just a backdrop to their lives. It was a living, breathing institution whose influence reached into their marriage, their personal choices, and the perception of the world around them. The duality of Meghan's hidden role, supportive yet strategic, comforting yet revealing, became one of the defining features of Harry's experience during this period. It forced him to confront new realities about his marriage, about public perception, and about the delicate balance between trust and strategy. For the first time, he recognized that private life and public image were inseparable, and that every decision carried weight in both realms simultaneously. And then came the subtle, almost imperceptible signals that the public was beginning to notice. Comments in interviews, timing of social media posts, and the framing of charitable appearances hinted that Meghan's influence was not just behind the scenes, but also shaping narratives for the outside world. Observers speculated endlessly. Was this deliberate? Was it protective? Or was it an unintended consequence of private discussions that had now become public fodder? For Harry, the answer was complicated, and the tension it created was palpable. And just as he began to process Meghan's role, the next challenge emerged, reconciling her actions with the family's reactions. How would other royals interpret her influence? Would they view it as support or interference? As advocacy or manipulation? The answers to these questions would ripple outward, affecting alliances, media narratives, and even the strategic decisions of Harry himself. But before Harry could fully grasp the implications, another revelation arrived. One that directly tied Meghan's hidden influence to a wider series of events within the family. A confidential communication, a leak, or a strategically timed remark, the specifics are still being pieced together, indicated that Meghan's role was central to the unfolding drama. It wasn't just private support. It was an active, deliberate shaping of outcomes in a context where every detail mattered. And that realization left Harry facing a profound question. How much control did he really have? And how much was being guided, or shaped, by someone he loved and trusted, in ways he was only beginning to understand? But what came next, the first tangible consequence of Meghan's hidden role, would push Harry to confront a reality that neither he nor the public could have anticipated, and it would challenge everything he thought he knew about loyalty, family, and trust. What would you do if private family conversations, ones meant to be confidential, intimate, and safe, suddenly became public knowledge? For Prince Harry, that nightmare became reality in the weeks following Princess Anne's revelation and Meghan's strategic influence. Leaked royal conversations began circulating, fragments of audio, snippets of text, and carefully reported anecdotes that painted a picture far more complex than anyone outside the palace could have imagined. And for Harry, the leaks weren't just inconvenient, they were devastating. It started subtly. A few lines quoted in media outlets, phrased to suggest tension, disagreement, or drama. At first, Harry dismissed them as routine speculation. After all, the media had long exaggerated the smallest incidents for clicks, views, and attention. But soon, patterns emerged. Conversations that he had assumed were private, between him and Meghan, between him and advisors, even between him and other royals, were being interpreted, analyzed, and publicly dissected. And the more the leaks spread, the more he realized that the private dynamics he relied upon were now subject to a global audience, a relentless court of opinion that would judge every word, pause, and inflection. Imagine sitting alone in your private quarters, reflecting on months of strategy and conversation, only to learn that the world already knows pieces of your plans, your doubts, and your disagreements. That was Harry's reality. Each leak acted like a crack in the carefully constructed facade he had built over years. It was one thing to navigate public scrutiny on his own terms. It was another entirely when private family exchanges were weaponized, or at least interpreted, by outsiders who had no understanding of context, intent, or nuance. The leaks were as diverse as they were disruptive. Some were brief snippets of private text messages, shared anonymously on social media or reported by tabloid journalists. Others were recounted by insider sources who claimed to have overheard conversations during casual meetings or private gatherings. Even the smallest phrases were dissected for meaning. A pause here, an emphasis there, a choice of words analyzed as though it were a declaration of war. Harry began to see that every private communication, no matter how mundane, could now have global consequences. And it wasn't just the content of the leaks that was troubling, it was the timing. Strategic placement of certain excerpts suggested deliberate intent. Lines released just before public events, interviews, or charitable engagements created ripples that couldn't be ignored. Harry, always aware of the optics of his public life, realized he was now reacting not only to family revelations and private emotional upheaval, but also to an orchestrated media narrative that could frame him unfavorably. Every reaction, every statement, every gesture could be amplified and scrutinized. The effect on his emotional state was immediate. Private frustration became a mix of anger, disbelief, and helplessness. Harry had spent years navigating public perception, carefully planning appearances and interviews, and yet here were fragments of his personal world being presented out of context. The feeling of violation was profound. Conversations that had once been a sanctuary, moments of honest dialogue with Meghan or trusted advisors, were now tainted by the knowledge that they might surface publicly at any moment. Some of the leaks involved discussions about succession, titles, and privileges, which had already been destabilized by Princess Anne's revelation. Other leaks involved personal reflections, Harry's feelings about family dynamics, trust, loyalty, and his own place within the monarchy. And while some of these snippets were benign, others were incendiary, interpreted as criticism, defiance, or confrontation. The world was now watching, analyzing, and debating Harry's private words, while he tried to maintain composure in a realm where every misstep could be magnified 100-fold. The contradictions were staggering. How could he express genuine emotion privately without it being misinterpreted publicly? How could he navigate private strategy when the very act of communication risked exposure? Harry began to recognize that his personal and public lives were no longer separate, and that the leaks were a powerful reminder of the fragile boundary between intimacy and spectacle in his world. Every word became a double-edged sword, every conversation a potential headline. And yet, there were moments of strategy, even in this chaos. Harry and Meghan carefully dissected the leaks, identifying patterns, sources, and potential motives. They discussed how the leaks might be shaping public perception, how they could respond without escalating conflict, and how to protect the integrity of their private life moving forward. These discussions were tense, often emotional, and required them to navigate a delicate balance, protect their privacy without alienating the public, maintain dignity without inflaming speculation. The leaked conversations also exposed fractures within the royal family. Private remarks by other family members, once considered confidential, revealed attitudes and opinions that Harry had not fully understood. Some comments suggested support, others hinted at judgment or disappointment. The leaks forced him to confront not only his own vulnerabilities, but also the subtle dynamics of alliances, loyalties, and rivalries within the palace. It was a window into a world that had always been opaque, now laid bare in fragments that were both illuminating and disorienting. And the public was captivated. Every snippet sparked debate, commentary, and speculation. Analysts dissected tone and intent. Journalists published articles interpreting hidden meanings. Social media users created threads and discussions dissecting every line. Harry's private reflections had become a spectacle, a story being told in pieces, with him at the center. The psychological toll was immense. Every interaction, every word, every decision had to account for this amplified scrutiny. But perhaps the most striking impact of the leaks was how they reshaped Harry's perception of trust. Conversations that had once been considered sacred were now potential points of exposure. Every discussion with Meghan, advisors, or family members carried a hidden weight. Could this one be leaked next? Could an offhand remark be twisted and used against him? The realization that privacy was no longer guaranteed added another layer to the already intense storm that Princess Anne's revelation had set in motion. And then there were the moral and emotional contradictions. Harry understood that the leaks weren't always malicious. Some were inadvertent, some perhaps motivated by loyalty to the institution, some by human error. Yet the effect was the same: vulnerability, exposure, and amplified tension. Every private emotion, frustration, sorrow, anger, or doubt, was now a public spectacle. Every personal reflection could be weaponized, misinterpreted, or sensationalized. As Harry processed these developments, he began to notice another layer of complexity. The leaks were not random. They were often timed to coincide with strategic events, interviews, or public appearances. They shaped narratives, influenced public perception, and, intentionally or not, pressured him into reactions he might not have chosen under different circumstances. Each leak became a puzzle, a clue, a piece of the larger storm he had been warned about, but could never fully anticipate. And just when Harry thought he had a grasp on the leak's implications, another wave arrived. One that wasn't just about private conversations, but about the larger narrative they were creating. Strategic snippets, carefully reported or deliberately framed, began to shape perceptions of Harry as defiant, estranged, or even reckless. The palace, the public, and the media were all watching how he would respond. Every reaction mattered. Every silence mattered. Every move was amplified. And then came the most critical realization. The leaked conversations weren't just personal. They were institutional. They had implications for the monarchy, for public perception, and for the relationships within the family. Harry had to navigate not only his own emotions, but also the broader consequences of his words being taken out of context. The pressure was relentless, the stakes unprecedented, and the emotional toll undeniable. But what came next? The revelation within the leaks that hinted at betrayal deeper than Harry could have imagined would push him to the edge, leaving him questioning not just the public narrative, but the loyalty of those he trusted most. What happens when the rules you thought were fixed, the privileges you assumed were guaranteed, suddenly shift beneath your feet? For Prince Harry, that moment arrived with brutal clarity. In the days following Princess Anne's revelation and the leaks of private conversations, the full implications began to hit him. The realization that his position within the royal family, his role in the line of succession, and even his privileges were no longer certain. The ground he had walked on all his life felt suddenly unstable, and the weight of history, expectation, and consequence pressed down with a force he could not ignore. It started subtly, as most seismic changes do. A private discussion with advisors revealed that certain assumptions he had long held about inheritance, roles, and titles were being reevaluated. Harry had always understood his position as secure, tempered by tradition and legal precedent. But now, there were whispers, documents, and confidential briefings that suggested otherwise. The very framework of his royal identity was being questioned, and every decision he had made with confidence now felt fragile, uncertain, and potentially irrelevant. Imagine the psychological impact. You have spent decades internalizing your place in a complex institution, balancing duty, public expectation, and personal ambition. You have assumed certain privileges as inevitable, rights as automatic. And suddenly, you are confronted with the stark reality that none of these guarantees are absolute. For Harry, this was more than a professional concern. It was a deeply personal shock. His identity, his sense of security, and his understanding of family dynamics were all being called into question. The revelation came in stages, each more disorienting than the last. First, private memos and internal communications indicated that certain titles and roles traditionally associated with his lineage were under review. Next, confidential discussions with family advisors confirmed the formal decisions. the line of succession, long assumed to be a matter of historical record, was being clarified in ways that effectively reduced Harry's standing. And finally, the implications extended to public perception. Statements crafted carefully by palace communications subtly framed the shift, influencing how the world would interpret his role and authority. Harry